Hi, I'm Tim. Join me in this video as we discuss the FAA controlled airspace system and how that affects RC radio control model pilots as well as drone operators. Let's get to it. As RC model pilots, we fly our airplanes in the National Airspace System anytime we take off. And when I'm talking RC pilots, I'm talking the regular radio control model pilots with fixed wing model airplanes we oftentimes fly at club fields. And it's also including drone pilots, the quad-armed drones that are very common flying now with modelers everywhere. From the FAA's viewpoint, the term RC models and drones really don't mean anything to the FAA. They consider all of these unmanned aircraft, in other words, aircraft without people in them flown from the ground, or common usage as drones, all bounce between RC planes and drones in this video. But the important point of this video is airspace, uncontrolled airspace, and controlled airspace. And the important point that I'll emphasize throughout the video, as drone operators or RC model airplane pilots, we must have permission from the FAA before we fly into controlled airspace. Again, we must have prior permission from the FAA to fly into controlled airspace, otherwise there may be a potential airspace violation. So in this video, I'm not going to teach you how to read a sectional chart or go into any great detail, but give you some overview, background, and context so when you hear terms like controlled airspace, you understand where it fits in, and you'll have a better understanding when you have to apply to the understanding of controlled airspace. As I mentioned, the FAA requires permission before drone or RC pilots can fly in controlled airspace. So let's go talk about definitions, for example. The FAA controls all the airspace over the United States to include Hawaii and Alaska, called the National Airspace System. And this entire National Airspace System is divided into either controlled airspace or uncontrolled airspace. Controlled airspace, as defined by the FAA, is airspace in which FAA can provide ATC or air traffic control services. Uncontrolled airspace is airspace that is not controlled. So it's a pretty clear distinction, controlled and uncontrolled. The controlled airspace is an effort by the FAA to provide safe separation between various types of operators. And there are two general types of full-scale operations that go on in the US. It is general aviation, which is defined as recreational flying. You're not doing it to make money, you're not carrying passengers, and commercial operations. Furthermore, both general aviation, i.e. recreational or commercial operators, could be under either instrument flight rules or visual flight rules. When an airplane is flying under instrument flight rules, they're talking to air traffic control, ATC, the entire time, so separation is pretty much assured. However, if you're flying under visual flight rules, you do not even have to be talking to air traffic control to safely and properly fly VFR traffic. And so the way the FAA mixes these two kind of competing philosophies of flying aircraft is the see and avoid principle. All aircraft with pilots in it are expected to see and avoid other aircraft. You could be a United pilot on a Boeing 777 aircraft or flying your Cessna 172 on a cross-country flight. You are expected to see the other aircraft and avoid it. This is how the FAA allows all these various aircraft to intermix. And that's one of the structural problems we have with drones. Drones cannot yet see and avoid. We can be flying in airspace with permission and controlled airspace, but there's no way for us to talk to ATC, and even if we could get some sort of radio relay, there's no way, and the FAA knows this, that drone or RC model pilots can see and avoid other traffic. That's just where we are at the moment. What I would like to do now is just give a very brief overview of how the FAA divides up the airspace. I will put the picture on top here when I go into detail. It'll be referencing this chart here. And I think it'll help you understand where the modelers fit in, because remember, we can fly in uncontrolled airspace all we want, to include close to airports. Controlled airspace, we need permission from the FAA. And towards the end of this video, I will show you how to understand very easily what airspace is controlled and uncontrolled, and with another application on your smartphone, how you get permission from the FAA to fly into controlled airspace. Again, who flies into controlled airspace? RC model pilots generally fly at club fields. They don't have too much of a need to fly in airspace outside their club airspace, although they could, depending on what they're doing. Drone operators, on the other hand, are flying outside of regular RC model airfields all the time to get their pictures, to do their whatever their purpose is of their flights. They have an absolute need to know when and where the controlled airspace is. So let's take a look at the chart. This is an overview of the types of airspace. The FAA divides all airspace with a letter, classes A, B, C, D, E, and G. There is no Class F airspace for a bunch of quirky rules with the international classification of the system. Class A, B, C, D, and E are all controlled airspace. The only airspace in this chart that is uncontrolled are the orange bands, which is Class G. So you can kind of, as a memory jogger, G, think go for it. So Class G airspace is uncontrolled. Drone RC pilots are absolutely cleared to fly in uncontrolled airspace below 400 feet. So let's start with the classification. Class A is the most restricted. That is starts at 18,000 feet, goes up to flight level 600, about 60,000 feet. Everybody flying in Class A airspace is under an instrument flight plan. In other words, you're talking airliners. That's why when you get on an airline flight to go somewhere, they climb very quickly to get above 18,000 feet to be in Class airspace. There is no VFR, visual flight rules aircraft in Class A airspace. Again, no concern for us as drone operators and model airplane pilots. Class B airspace, the blue cylinder on the left, is still controlled airspace, Class B, and it's fairly restrictive. Class B is around the busiest airports in the United States. There are 37 airports that are Class B airspace. Think San Francisco, Los Angeles, Atlanta, Boston, Miami. And the idea of the Class B airspace is it's very busy airspace with a lot of commercial traffic, and anybody flying general aviation, recreational, or under visual flight rules needs a clearance from ATC to enter Class B airspace. You've got to be cleared in. Note also the Class B airspace goes down to the surface. So this is important. If you fly your drone near a Class B airport, you could be in the controlled airspace if you get too close to it. More on that later. Class C, the purple diagram, is a little bit less restrictive than B, a little bit less operations. Always over an airport down to the surface. Class D, the blue, is a control tower. The control tower, by being in operation, brings controlled airspace down to the surface. Notice with Class B, it can go up to 10,000 feet. Class C, typically 4,500 feet. Class D, 2,500 feet. Notice also to the right of the blue Class D, you have some of the green Class E airspace that goes down to the surface over the two little white lines that indicate a runway. This means that controlled airspace, Class E, is brought down to the surface. This is typically for fields that may not even have a control tower, but they have an instrument approach. In other words, air traffic control surfaces, so the Class E airspace is brought down to the surface. Again, green, Class E, is controlled airspace. You can't fly without permission. So that leads us with the remaining airspace. As you can see, with the remaining airspace, Class G is the orange airspace. Anywhere that is orange airspace, Class G, we are cleared to fly because it's uncontrolled airspace below 400 feet. So again, with the chart up above, you can see that the Class G airspace begins either 700 feet AGL or above ground level, or 1,200 feet AGL. It just depends what the FAA wants to do. Virtually all of the Class G airspace in the eastern half of the United States, east of the Mississippi River, the Class G airspace will be 700 feet or below, maybe 1,200 feet. There are some sections in the west of the United States that are sparsely populated, perhaps in Montana and North Dakota, where the Class G airspace can go up to 14,500 feet, just for your background information. Notice also that in the right side of the diagram, in the orange Class G airspace, there are little runways noted there. You can have an airport that is completely within Class G or uncontrolled airspace in which you are cleared to fly your drone. So the question comes up, what are the rules from the FAA for flying in Class G uncontrolled airspace, but I'm very near an airport? Again, I'm going to read notes. This is from the FAA.gov website. It is an excellent website with a wealth of information for drone operators and RC pilots. What the FAA says about flying near airports, obviously this is uncontrolled airspace. Drone operators should avoid flying near airports because it's difficult for manned aircraft to see and avoid a drone by flying, the see and avoid that I discussed earlier. Remember that drone operators must avoid manned aircraft and are responsible for any safety hazard the drone creates in an airport environment. So what the FAA is doing is they're trying to reach a compromise. They're not prohibiting drone operations near airports and uncontrolled airspace. They're just saying be careful because you're near an airport. Our drones or models are small. The full-scale pilots may not see us. And even though it's not officially noted, we can still do some see and avoid because we're looking at the model airplane, looking at the Piper Cub or the Cessna. Hopefully we can see the full-scale aircraft, avoid it. And what I would recommend that if you want to fly your drone or RC model aircraft near a local airport in Class G airspace, you're legal to do this. Talk to the airport operator. They have an airport manager somewhere. Explain what you want to do, and they can work out something that'll probably allow you to do that flight. Remember, even though the airports are in uncontrolled airspace, very often that they have radio contact with pilots. It's called unicom, is a common frequency. They can't clear the pilots to do things, but they sure as heck can give advisory. And they'll just say there's drone operations southeast of the airfield below 400 feet, exercise caution, something along those lines. The FAA continues on this thing on flight near airports to talk about airports and controlled airspace. Remember, that's Class B, C, D, and E, where it goes down to the ground. For flights near airports and controlled airspace, drone operators must receive an airspace authorization prior to operation. Airspace authorizations come with altitude limitations, may include other provisions, and I'll explain how to do that later in this video with a very easy to use FAA application. The way that the FAA communicates to pilots, full-scale pilots, and include RC pilots and drone operators if you wish, information on exactly where controlled airspace is in the entire United States is through a product called a sectional chart. And a sectional chart is an aeronautical chart designed for navigation under visual flight rules. VFR pilots have to carry a sectional chart. The sectional charts can have a lot of information on them. As a former flight instructor, I'm quite comfortable reading sectional charts. I can pick up where the airspace is, but if you don't use them on a fairly regular basis, there's a ton of information. If, as a drone operator or RC pilot, you get your Part 107 certification, where you're going to use your drone for commercial operations, there is an awful lot of material to be studied how to read a sectional chart. But what I would recommend if you do want to use a sectional chart, if there's somebody in your club who's a private pilot or you go to a local airport, the sectional charts used to come out on paper charts. These days, they're all done on computer, on a tablet. There's a program called ForeFlight. Every VFR pilot in the world has it on their smart pad. Every sectional chart of the entire United States is on the iPad. You can expand it. The iPad knows where you are, so you can see your exact location. And by reading the sectional chart, you'll find very quickly what type of airspace you're on. If it's uncontrolled, where it is. It's a very handy thing to have, so just keep that in the back of your mind. But there is an easier way for the casual pilot with the application I'll talk about here momentarily to determine the all-important data point, am I in controlled airspace or uncontrolled airspace? So how can you tell easily if you're a RC model pilot or drone operator if you're going to be flying in controlled airspace, which you have to know? And the answer is, from the FAA website, the Before You Fly mobile application, literally Before You Fly mobile app. There's a good amount of information on this on the FAA website. What has happened is the FAA has a tremendous amount of information because they produce the sectional charts on where all this controlled airspace, altitudes, etc. are. But the FAA doesn't have an easy way to build an app and communicate that with you. What the FAA is doing is partnering with industry, with selected partners, so these industry partners can build the application, have access to the FAA database on the airspace and prevent it to users. And the first company doing this is Kitty Hawk, and they have developed the Before You Fly mobile application, which is an official FAA certification. And what it does, the Before You Fly, it'll simply tell you whether or not your proposed flight is in controlled or uncontrolled airspace. Now, it doesn't give you permission to fly in the airspace. It just says whether or not it's controlled or uncontrolled. So and to get permission will be the next app from the FAA called LAANC, which is a low altitude authorization and notification capability, LAANC. Let's take a quick look at the FAA website for what they have to say before you fly, and I'll walk you through the website on that. This is the home page of the FAA website. You can see how important unmanned operations are. There's a little button right there that'll take you to the UAS section. Top tasks, you can see there is the Before You Fly mobile app, a good description of what the app does, key features, and these are some screenshots with examples here. This is good to go for Oklahoma City. Another place, Oklahoma City, good to go with other airports nearby. Good information. The red is do not fly. There's a lat long, so you can see that can be entered into the application. Another example of Washington, D.C., just a bunch of restricted, prohibited airspace in there you need to be aware of with your drone operations. Kitty Hawk, a little bit in the middle of nowhere, that should be good to go. And here's another lat long out by Washington State with Olympia Class D airspace. And here's Kitty Hawk that I mentioned before. When the Before You Fly app first came out, 2018, 2019, it was not well received. It typically would have 1.2 stars out of 5 on the various stores where you would buy it. The app is the future, I believe. This is the best way to do it. And the app has made significant improvements since then. One of the best features is if you think something is squirrely or not quite right with the information you're getting, you can let them know, I think this is wrong. And a very good example of where that happened is the initial rollout of Before You Fly 2 years ago. Every heliport in the US was plotted out on the Before You Fly. There's tons of heliports everywhere. And that's not really relevant for controlled, uncontrolled airspace, and it confused a lot of people. If you see something's wrong, you can say, I think there's something wrong with this, send it in, and they can improve the app from there. Now, once we know whether or not we're in controlled or uncontrolled airspace, let's say you've determined your flight, you want to go into controlled airspace for whatever reason. You're taking pictures of real estate, you're doing a survey of farm crops, whatever. How do you get permission from the FAA to fly into the controlled airspace? Again, from the FAA website is this information right here, and it is the Unmanned Aerial Systems Data Exchange for Low Altitude Authorization Notification Capability, called LAANC. Again, LAANC provides drone pilots with access to controlled airspace below 400 feet, awareness of where pilots can and cannot fly, and it provides information back to air traffic control professionals so they have visibility where drones are or are not operating. Right now, there's about 726 airports participating in the LAANC program. You can provide information where you want to fly, routes, etc., and it will give you, in many cases, an almost instant notification. If an airport or airspace is not participating, there is a web-based system to submit it. It may take a period of time to get back, but they're slowly trying to improve the LAANC capabilities. And what happens is there are a number of companies, AirMap, Airspace Link, Kitty Hawk, Skyward, that are partnering with the FAA to use this database for a LAANC application. Let's take a quick look at the FAA website. They have a good discussion of the LAANC system, and there's a 3-minute video. We won't go through the three-minute video, but you'll see where it is on the website that does an excellent job of explaining the LAANC system. This is the LAANC section on the FAA website. You can type in LAANC to find it. A good description of what LAANC is, how it works, how and when drone pilots can use LAANC. They just want to get the word out. Just useful information for the program, what it can do, where it can fly into LAANC, the approved service suppliers that are partnering with LAANC. This will change and evolve over time. In the little 3-minute video that I described earlier, we won't play the whole video, but again, a good description of LAANC and how it can work for your advantage. In conclusion, there are an increasing number of regulations that are coming to play for drone and radio control model airplane flight. Since 2015, we've been required to register our RC model airplanes for recreational use. We have to register all models that are greater than 0.55 pounds, which is about 8.2 ounces, and it has to be below 55 pounds. You're required to register it. Very easy to do on the FAA website. You get a registration number. It's one number for all of your recreational models. Part 107 is a little bit different. You have to register each one individually, but that'll be for a separate Part 107 discussion. The other thing that is coming in the future is remote ID. I'm filming this video in January of 2021. About a week ago, on December 28th, 2020, the FAA released its final rule on remote ID. We have 2.5 years until September of 2023, when the remote ID will be required to follow it. More to follow as we understand what that is, but essentially, all aircraft flying away from their RC Model Club airfields are going to need a bit of electronics, either built into the aircraft or a separate module to identify them in airspace, even uncontrolled airspace, for the FAA safe separation. And then the third requirement we have discussed in this video is knowledge of when you're flying in controlled airspace to make sure you have permission before you fly in a controlled airspace. And keep in mind, this is the beginning of probably more regulations. I know a lot of modelers don't like to hear that, but this is a new industry being born before our eyes. Right now, the vast majority of drone flyers, about 1.3 million, are recreational and Part 107 flyers. They're not commercial operators. The FAA believes in 10 years that's going to flip. The majority are going to be pretty sophisticated commercial operations. Think FedEx, UPS, Amazon. They'll be flying in the airspace. And there's just going to be an evolution and increase in the rules. The Before You Fly app is a great starting point with the FAA to understand where controlled and uncontrolled airspace is. Then the LAANC system, which is another app on the FAA, is a great and evolving way that didn't exist 2 years ago to get permission on when you can fly in controlled airspace. There's one final item that I want to discuss on airspace, kind of left the best for the last, and that is, we discussed the controlled airspace A through G, but there's other bits of airspace in there that you need to be aware of. There's restricted airspace, there are prohibited zones, think in the White House in Washington, D.C., and there's also another class of airspace called TFR, or temporary flight restrictions. The temporary flight restrictions are super important for model pilots because they could be anywhere in the country at any time. And they are typically for major events like the Super Bowl, and they also pop up, the temporary flight restrictions, anytime the president or vice president goes somewhere. These TFRs, for example, if the president, I live in Georgia, if they come to Atlanta, the TFRs typically go up to 10,000 feet, and they can extend 30 miles, I repeat, 30 miles from wherever the president is going to be. This could be Air Force One at an airport. It could be his motorcade going to location. And these TFRs, for security reasons, are not published until 2 or 3 days before they actually occur. The reason I want to highlight the TFRs is the federal government is deadly serious about these TFRs just because they don't want these important people harmed in any way. There have been numerous cases of these TFRs popping up in odd locations. Think Wisconsin. There are people flying their Piper Cubs, full-scale aircraft, general aviation, visual flight rules. Literally, there have been cases they have strayed 1 mile into the 30-mile ring around the TFR area. It is picked up on radar with these aircraft. F-16s are scrambled. The airplanes land at the nearest airport, and they're met with ages on the ground, to include losing the license. For drone operations, they've also stated that if they find a drone operation of these TFRs, they will seize the drone, and the operator is liable for some very serious penalties. So again, this is all the more need to be aware of where you are flying. I just want to close with, because the TFRs are so important, there is a dedicated website on the FAA that describes the TFRs, and I'd like to show that to you now with the web address, just to show you the map of the United States and how you can pretty easily find where the TFRs are. This is filmed on January 6th of 2021. President-elect Biden is still not been sworn in as president. However, you can see that there are TFRs for his movements in Delaware, Philadelphia, that you need to be aware of RC model pilots. This is the temporary flight restriction website, a map of the United States. You can see the little navigation arrows, a zoom function where you can zoom into various parts of the country. Again, these TFRs could be anywhere in the nation. This is the eastern half, the red circle around Washington, D.C., and these are specific TFRs. You can see a VIP on Delaware, obviously for President-elect Biden. We click on that. There's a circle around by Philadelphia, and you type on it for VIP. There's detailed information. And notice number 5 down here, UAS operations who do not comply is a specific paragraph on UAS operations. The federal authorities are very concerned about unauthorized unmanned aircraft operations near VIPs. You can see that there's other type of operations out of a TFR. This is space operations in Florida, clearly a missile, rocket launch of some type. Space operations, another VIP, Wilmington, Delaware, again, most likely with the Vice President or future President-elect Biden. I'd like to thank you very much for watching this video. It's important that we understand these concepts of airspace, rules, regulations for RC models and drone pilots. It's just a fact of life in 2021, and we just need to be able to follow these and follow the rules. Thank you very much for your time.